The final part of the prelude then, after the Volta, is all about the darkness and solitude and grave and serious mood that Wordsworth finds himself in on realising his insignificant place in the world. So we've got that Volta, the huge peak, black and huge, and then after that are layers upon layers of imagery of nature juxtaposed with his fear and darkness and blank desertion, as he calls it. There's loads of quotable, melancholy, sinister imagery later on in this poem. So from that Volta, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head. Notice lots of personification there. I've not even put in the upreared its head, but we've got this sense that nature is fighting back against him. It towered up. That sense of height is really crucial there. A purpose of its own. So nature is in control of the world and not man in control of nature. It strode after me, but we've got that upreared its head, that fearful sense of nature rising against man, which is quite a scary image in itself, but it's that realization of his insignificance, his vulnerability compared to nature. I struck and struck again. Now notice, he's been rowing, he's been gliding, heaving through the water like a swan. We talked about heaving, that there's a sense of hard work, but it's elegant, it's easy to him, even with that hard work. Whereas here, I struck and struck again. That repetition of that quite violent verb struck, suggesting his panic, a U-turn, getting away as quick as possible into the safety of the covert where he first found the boat. So that repetition's crucial there. And growing still in stature, the grim shape, that personification of the mountain, that metaphor of the difficulties in life, of the control and power of nature, towered up between me and the stars. So the stars that at one point had given him light now are blocked by this enormous peak, this huge mountain that represents the power of nature. And still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. So all of this personification, as I've said, gives a sense of intimidation, of the power of nature rising back against man, that man has no escape from nature, really. With trembling oars I turned. Now, trembling, it's that sense of fear, isn't it? That sense of vulnerability that he feels in the presence of so much nature. He's so tiny, he's so lost within the world. So nature represents nature, and that man does not have power over nature, but it's also the sense of the journey of life, that at some point you find just how small you are in the huge clockwork of mankind. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the covert of the willow tree. So it's a retreat. He's gone back home, back to the mooring place where he found his bark. And that sense of going back into himself leads to that depression, that darkness, that solitude in the final few lines of the poem. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went in grave and serious mood. Now, we've got lots of juxtaposition between nature here and his mood. So just in that particular phrase, through the meadows went. Now, meadows would usually be green and joyous and pleasant, but in this case, he's ignoring the beauty of nature because he's in such a grave and serious mood. And we had those words in the first part, and we looked at the negativity, the sinister tone of grave and serious. But after I'd seen that spectacle for many days, my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. So at that point, he realizes that this realization of the power of nature hangs over him. And it's our key quote later: their hunger, darkness, call it solitude. Hunger in itself as a verb suggests he's covered. There's no escape. It's always above him, always surrounding him, this darkness, this depression at his own insignificance in the world. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields. Now look at the repetition of no and the listing, and that emphasises his lack of comfort. Usually he might have taken comfort in the beauty of the surroundings, but not in this case. He realises his insignificance, his vulnerability, his tiny part in the world, and that there's no comfort to him. And that repetition of that negative is crucial there. But huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. So his dreams and his thoughts are always clouded by the vastness of nature, by the vastness of the world and his life around him. And that end part turns the poem from what is called a euphony to a cacophony. Now, euphony, if you think of the word euphoric, you're happy, you're joyous. So it's joyous sounding words like the glittering, like the sparkling. So we've gone from a euphony at the start, a celebration of life, to a cacophony. A cacophony is a mixture of horrific sounds. And at the end, we've got those D sound, darkness, dreary, dark. And we've got the cacophony of words like solitude, grim, bleak. Okay, we've got all of those words that turn it into an unpleasant sounding poem. So the structure, if you wanted to talk about it more, is from a euphony to a cacophony. It's quite a simple poem, the Prelude, once you've got those key things. And if you're going to use it as your memorised poem, take those key quotes that we've had up and squeeze as much as you can out of those. It's full of contrasting imagery, it's full of juxtaposition. The structure's there to talk about. We talk in the first part about the free verse, but the iambic pentameter, that juxtaposition of time moving onwards, and yet that sense of lack of direction. You've got very memorable quotes: a huge peak, black and a huge, heaving through the water like a swan. The hunger darkness, call it solitude. Loads of really rememberable quotes. But what does it go with? It kind of sits outside the collection a little bit, the Prelude, because although it is about the power of nature over man, you can only really look at it in detail in that way. And so really it's best with Storm on the Island. You could link it with Ozymandias because you've got the links of romantic poets Shelley and Wordsworth. It could go with something like Remains, because you've got the sense that his dreams are haunted by his vision, which of course you could link into the soldier in Remains, who blinks and sleeps and dreams with the image of what he's done. I don't think it's a really secure connection, and this poem really goes best with the nature side of things, with Ozymandias, but particularly with Storm on the Island.